And we begin traditionally with the schedule of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, on February the 1st, the traditional working breakfast of the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation with the ambassadors of the CIS member states accredited in Russia will be held in Moscow. During the meeting, the minister is expected to inform his colleagues about Russia's approaches to key issues on the international and regional agenda, summarize the results of multifaceted cooperation with the Commonwealth in 2023, and outline the priorities of Russia's chairmanship in the organization this year. On February the 7th, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, will meet in Moscow with the chairman of the commissions of the parliaments of the CSTO member states, whose competence includes international relations, defense, and security issues, as well as the ambassadors of the CSTO countries in the Russian Federation. An exchange of views is planned on the situation in the organization's area of responsibilities and neighboring regions, as well as on current problems of international and regional security, and to discuss promising areas of cooperation in the CSTO format with a focus on strengthening interparliamentary cooperation and foreign policy coordination. And now, for the Ukrainian crisis, the Ukrainian regime continues to commit bloody crimes against civilians in Russian cities using weapons supplied by Western countries. On January 29th this year, Ukrainian neo-Nazis once again barbarously attacked the densely populated Kalininsky district with multiple rocket launchers. 4 dead and 16 wounded were reported. On the same day, the village of Novodruzhsk, LNR, came under artillery attack where 2 schoolgirls were injured. On January 27th and 28th, the armed forces of Ukraine targeted Nova Kakhovka. 1 person was killed and 2 wounded. Recently, the Banderovists have begun to literally hunt for unarmed people, attacking them with drones loaded with ammunition. On January 28th this year, they mercilessly dropped a grenade on a family with 2 children at a market in Kirsky district of Donetsk. Their father was seriously wounded. On the same day, a similar use of unmanned aerial vehicle in the Donetsk settlement of Shakhty Vakumova injured 3 women and a man. On January 25th this year, in Belgorod region, Ukronazis cynically killed a resident of the Lazovaya Rudka settlement by dropping a bomb on her from a quadricopter. On January 28th this year, an excavator driver was injured in Kolotilivka locality after being attacked by a drone. On January 27th this year, Novokakhovka Ukrainian militants made a deliberate drone strike on volunteer vehicles. As a result, a 70-year-old woman was seriously injured. According to the DNR authorities, the Ukrainian armed forces have stepped up drone attacks on the Holy Dormidian monastery of St. Nicholas Vasiliev near Ugledar. This monastery, where several dozen monks live, is regularly subjected to cynical shelling from the Ukrainian side. On January 29th this year, as a result of another strike, a priest was wounded. There is no doubt that the Banderists are acting consciously and deliberately. The drone operator sees and understands perfectly well whom he directed at, whether it is military hardware or an ordinary family that has come to the market for shopping. All these atrocities are being carefully recorded by Russian law enforcement agencies. Those involved will certainly be identified and brought to justice. The courts of the Russian Federation continue to pass sentences on Ukrainian militants who have committed grave crimes against civilians on the basis of evidence gathered by the Russian Investigative Committee. Ukrainian neo-Nazi Tkachuk, who ordered the shooting of 10 civilians in Mariupol in the spring of 2022, 8 of whom died, received a life sentence. A militant of the Nazi Azov battalion, Dashkovsky, who ordered to shoot a civilian in Mariupol in April 2022, was sentenced in absentia to 25 years in prison. The same sentence in absentia was given to the Ukrainian militant Parlomarenko, who shot and killed a civilian in Mariupol in March 2022, while carrying out a criminal order from a senior officer in his position. None of the Ukrainian criminals will be able to escape punishment. They will be identified and will be held accountable to the full extent of the law. Embezzlement has long been a hallmark of Ukraine. And all those things are interconnected. Unfortunately, one of the leaders in the number of high-profile corruption scandals in the world is Ukraine, and over there the person in charge are the heads of the Kiev regime, of the Zelensky's regime, and all of that revolves around the country's Ministry of Defense. And it doesn't only look wild. And taking into account the statements made on the international platforms by the Kiev representatives on how they ask for more material support, for more arms and supplies, for more money from the Western states. And then they flush all of that into the corrupted regime. Recently, the Security Service of Ukraine reported that it had uncovered new embezzlement in the ministry for $40 million during the purchase of shells. According to Ukrainian media and social networks, there is no less large-scale embezzlement of foreign humanitarian aid among volunteer organizations. Does it sound less insane? And unfortunately, it's becoming a norm for goods labeled not for sales or humanitarian aid that is being supplied to Ukraine. First of all, by their Western mentors and other countries that should be aimed at those providing this support to those in need. All of that ends up on the shelves of stores in order to provide for the population in exchange for money. And large trading sites on the internet and other places are starting trade of humanitarian aid. And all those goods are marked. They're not made for trade. And in the absence of proper control, volunteering in Ukraine has become a thriving, corrupted business. Rampant corruption and widespread theft are of growing concern. Perhaps not even concern, but rage to the United States. They're uncomfortable by reading all this information because all of them are connected. In order to install some sort of law on January 29th this year, 3 inspectors general representing the Pentagon, the State Department, and the Agency for International Development arrived in Kiev from Washington. The inspectors intend to hold a number of meetings with Ukrainian officials on issues of accountability and increased oversight over the target use of U.S. aid, as they claim. What kind of oversight can they talk about if this U.S. aid is spread all over the world? All the arms that are supplied by the U.S. to the Ukraine can already be located in the Middle East. What kind of control or increased oversight are they talking about? And who are they talking about it with? Those who are stealing in Ukraine. Who will enforce this oversight? Who are they addressing themselves at? Those who are closely intertwined with the White House. And according to Mick Wallace, a member of the European Parliament, the EU hypocritically glosses over the facts of widespread corruption of the Kiev regime. And according to him, the EU is turning a blind eye to the fact that the European Court of Auditors has recognized Ukraine as an extremely corrupt country. This is a terrifying reality. That can be studied by Western media, because those are the materials needed for the White House to answer to their potential population and electors on how they're working with the Kiev regime on the control of preventing corruption. But it's not preventing corruption, it's a literal corrupted hell. But real investigations have not appeared in the Western mass media yet, but of course it will happen in the future. Washington has recently intensified its worldwide search for remnants of Soviet and Russian-made weapons to be later on sent to Ukraine. Recently, Greek media reported that the United States is trying to persuade Athens to transfer Russian air defense systems and ammunition to Kyiv. In exchange, Greece has promised obsolete BMPs, frigates, and other weapons, as well as $200 million in addition, which, according to Greek experts, is surely not enough to buy even one Western air defense system. Kyiv takes for granted the American efforts to fill the coming arms famine of the Ukrainian armed forces and is increasingly insistent that Ukraine should not be abandoned. On the bank of sensing the inevitable collapse of the regime, in case the US and EU aid is cut off, they openly blackmail Western curators with terrible consequences of the military defeat of Zelensky's regime. So they expect that those terrible consequences are still coming. And they don't think that destroying their own country, killing their own civil population is a terrible consequence. They only think that those are coming. First of all, they scare Europeans with the mythical threat of Russian occupation of a significant territory of the old world countries, as they say. And we see that those under the control of Washington, public officials in the NATO countries, in the European Union countries, have recently been talking over the last few weeks over this very same subject and speaking out over the preparation of war on our side, or a conflict, another wave of tension. And people, the European populations, are horrified, have no idea what they're talking about, but it's all about the same thing, which they're not informed about, that they need to get a hold of the last pennies to help the Kyiv regime, because Washington said that it's incapable of doing so, but the NATO countries absolutely have to do it. But in order to justify the manic need to take everything and hand it over to the Kyiv regime, they're starting a new wave of myths and horrifying stories as for the inevitability of war on the European continent. And we should call the countries of the collective West and the European countries. What if you speak unilaterally or during the events under the auspices of NATO, then please try to say that this is your point of view and your intention, but in no way impose that ideology on us. And don't claim that your sick fantasies belong to us. At the same time, the Kyiv regime, it's clearly not enough for them to loot Ukraine on a large scale. They need more. Selling off its natural wealth is not enough. They continue to squander cultural, historical, and religious values. It's horrifying what is taking place. And Kyiv regime, in its characteristic manner, does not even think about the future, even though they're scaring the European Union with their own consequences, but they not think about their own future. On January 29th of this year, in an interview with the German media holding, Zelensky called on Berlin to stop paying benefits to Ukrainian refugees. And instead, the funds intended for this purpose should be directly transferred to help Ukraine, the Ukrainian armed forces, so Ukrainians who had emigrated to Germany, especially those of mobilization age, they already have their future decided by Zelensky. Moreover, they have to return to pay their debt to their homeland, or to the Kyiv regime, obviously, and start paying taxes to the Ukrainian treasury at the same time. It's not only cynical, it's blatant Satanism, what is going on over there. So going back to the cultural and religious values, I understand, of course, that if they're not sparing their own population, why should they spare the cultural, religious heritage? But this is what has been piling up over the cultural fund of the whole nation. And recently, the American newspaper reported that back in May 2023, 16 priceless Orthodox icons were secretly exported to France. Some of them became exhibits of the Louvre, and we've already spoken about this before. And of course, the Kiev regime does not report on that to their own population. And the rest of the icons, according to the American media, were sent to the museum storage. And it cannot be ruled out that these relics were stolen from the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. But it's also probably interlinked with other cathedrals of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So we're not talking about private collections, private museums, but by taking away from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church heritage, by throwing the priests on the street, by locking them up in jails, all of that is conducted in order to steal all the heritage and values that have been preserved by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We're talking a lot about the believers, but we should also report on the proof and what can be clearly seen in the Western museums that we are witnessing looting on a large scale of organizations, structures that aren't even owned by state, and that the Kiev regime has no right to touch. But right now they're using all the instruments to steal and take away everything that still holds any last bit of value. And we all understand the value of Ukrainian Orthodox churches. It was a popular place for the whole world. So this looting is happening in the course of raiding attacks by authorities in the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine supported by them. So this structure, pseudo-Orthodox, pseudo-religious structure, was created not only to destroy the lives of Orthodox people in Ukraine, but also to become the arms with the use of which they're stealing away holy places and values. And these relics do not belong to the criminal regime of Mr. Zelensky. They are worldwide Orthodox relics. And the question arises as to whether they will not suffer the fate of the Scythian gold belonging to the museums of the Russian Crimea, which was transferred by the Dutch authorities to Ukraine, contrary to contractual obligations and norms of museum cooperation. All of the above, from the use of heavy weapons against civilians in our cities and rampant corruption, to the intrusive shaking down of aid from Westerners, and the circle closes on the murdering of the civilians of their own country and other civilians, and the trivial theft of other people's property, are clear evidence of the panic gripping the agonizing Kiev regime amid the deafening failure of the notorious counter-offensive and the successful actions of the Russian armed forces, which will continue. I do it every time, and I will do it once again. I would like to underline the tasks of special military operation and demilitarizing Ukraine, and to eliminate the threats emanating from its territory remain relevant, and all of them will definitely be accomplished. And speaking of cultural values, which is especially important in the context around Ukraine and everything that has to do with history of the Second World War, how are all these things interlinked? I'm sure all of you remember the scandal where they honored the S-man Yaroslav Hunka in the parliament in September.
So it just confirmed the reputation of Canada as a harbor for Nazi criminals. And more news about harboring Nazi criminals testify that those acts for years providing a safe harbor for those who had served Hitler in various areas. In November 2023, there was a journalist investigation that revealed that the former director of the Winnipeg Art Gallery, that's the capital of Manitoba, the Austrian-Canadian art historian Ferdinand Eckhardt, that is well known, died in 1995. And many materials have been written about him, published not only in the internet but also in traditional periodics. He was a distinct Nazi collaborator and was engaged in the process of Nazification of culture. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Führer, and he published certain materials. And he did all his best to serve the Third Reich ideology. That concentration camp had a contract to produce for Auschwitz a poisonous substance for mass killings. And that's what Ferdinand Eckhardt's name is connected with that. However, in 1953, he moved to Canada in order to avoid punishment, and he headed the Winnipeg Art Gallery there for 20 years. However, the current management of the gallery tried to downplay the significance of those details of Eckhardt's biography. And it was stated that the accusations were allegedly unfounded, lacked specific references, and it was only under the pressure of the facts revealed that the administration recognized they were mistaken and deleted the name of their former head from the list of distinctive figures. And now the origin of the cultural property donated by the art historian, their origin is being checked. It is emphasized that their purity should be found. But why was it not found, checked in all those decades? I will explain. That way, all those Nazis who escaped to Canada, they just paid that to the local government, to the local law enforcement officials, and the public, the journalists. They just handed those plundered valuables. They stole also from our country, so they made an input to the development of Canada itself. And they had clean documents for that, and the new fresh life. Now the museum employees are trying to reach justice and reconciliation, but who should be reconciled with whom? Should we be reconciled with history, fakes with the truth? What should be reconciled here? Or should we admit that Canada has systematically, from year to year, been gathering people connected directly with the Third Reich? In connection with these new facts, we should ask, why was the identity check so weak in Canada back then. They did not want to check. I will reply. They knew everything. They had the data. They just created the momentum for the future moment in history we are now living through. And there is one more question. Why the former Nazis that have tortured millions of Soviet citizens, they became such honorable members of the society? And it was not only in Canada, it was also the US, Japan, Italy. All those supporting now the criminal regime of Zelensky, they are clearly connected with the horrible, bloody past. And this incident with Ferdinand Eckhardt clearly characterizes the double standards of the liberal global elite that is in power in Canada. And their pro-Nazi, neo-Nazi essence, they are not, will not deny anyway. And no justifications that they did not know who Hanke was. And facts in connection with Eckhart would not be able to rehabilitate them and not be able to explain anything to the society, because there are many such cases, and they just not bear responsibility for that. They published a couple of press releases, give a couple of interviews. They just take away those honorary marks, rewrite the headings, and just on this page. And no one will bear any responsibility for that. No one bears responsibility. And as it was honoring Hanke in the parliament in September 2023, the Canadian authorities will limit to a formal regret and will do nothing to eradicate the Nazi legacy. And I also admit that they can invent some information campaign by the Kremlin, Russian hackers, as they like to do. I would like to reiterate that we view Canada as a very unfriendly state whose authorities have tainted themselves by their complicity with Nazism, and we will structure our policy accordingly. With regard to Moldova, whose heads continue unfriendly statements towards our country. On January, the 25th of January this year, at the winter session of PACE, the Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Mikhail Paphos, spoke about 300 billion euros confiscated, just simply stolen by Western jurisdictions, to be allocated, as he was his wording, to protect Ukraine from bombing and terrible suffering. Although he's grown up, he may not be aware that will just continue this suffering, those shipments, and it's just a desire to search for money in other people's pockets and to demonstrate servility to the Kiev regime and its masters. And they do not notice that in Moldova itself, the situation continues to deteriorate. Maybe he should better engage in their own economy, in their own business. I would like to state some facts. The food prices in Moldova grew by 62%, and the GDP shrank by 0.4%. The manufacturing industry decreased by 7.7%, construction by 8.6%, energy by 23%. The public debt grew by almost 10% and is now reaching up to $5.9 billion. The Moldovan Center for Combating Corruption on the 23rd of January legalized the so-called bonus received by President Maia Sandu of €30,000 for promoting the so-called European values. It's a good explanation for Maia Sandu to receive €30,000 in the law on integrity. The word price is not included into the list of terms defining the concept of gift, so it can be taken. On the 26th of January, the Information and Security Service of Moldova approved 530 unreliable individuals and legal entities, and those lists included opposition figures, and it's difficult to believe, I understand, but they are oriented towards Western values. It was dead people, citizens who died several years ago. So it's just characteristic of America, isn't it? So they continue measures against people who do not agree, against the anti-people cause of Chisinau. So it's a good topic for the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Moldova to engage here or to prepare his further speeches in European platforms. So in public space, we see the increasing detachment of the authorities from the real situation in the country and the interests of the people. This support should be sought in Moldova itself, not on the sidelines of Euro-Atlantic institutions and the endless European visions. So it's quite a good topic to engage. And we call on official Chisinau to stop the Russophobic rhetoric. It does not work. And I will just tell you a secret. It works against you. Some words on the situation around global sports. The US continues measures to not allow Russian athletes to participate in international competitions and to disrupt international sporting events. To this end, Washington is using all its possibilities. Do you remember when in the US they started the campaign around the sports in Russia? The main topic was doping. When they asked to provide some data to take into account that the problem is global, should be resolved collectively and not be turned into some political repression mechanism, they reiterated therefore the purity of sports, only for sports. Now it has identified the essence of the task of the US. It was not about the doping, not about the purity of sports. It was not dedicated to protecting the principles of Olympic movement or what has been achieved in the global sports. It was only about one thing, to do that for Russia and maybe other countries like Belarus, not to be among the athletes in the leading global events, so because it was competition. They considered at the end of the 90s that nothing from the territory of our country, they are not threatened in sports achievements. And for these years, we have increased our sports achievements, and that is why a program has been adopted to push Russian athletes from global platforms to marginalize Russian sports and Russia as a sports powerhouse, and to create some prerequisites profitable for the US exclusively in this sphere. And now we observe that it has all been without any camouflage or some attempts to mask that or to provide some human form to that. It's all just open, but that has begun long ago. And I remember very well, when we drew attention to that topic, we were answered that there is no policy in that at all, and the Western journalists were also convinced and they spoke only about the health of athletes and not spreading doping. And now we have reached this result. It's blackmail, intimidation of athletes by American authorities. When I mention the intimidation of athletes as potential participants of competitions organized in our country, the International Olympic Committee experiences pressure, and with regard to WADA as well, the purpose is obvious: not to allow Russian athletes, particularly with the Russian flag and anthem, and also to provide obstacles for sporting events in Russia. Russian sports, it has excellent result, and the West is not pleased with that. And so that dirty fight that is a part of a hybrid war against our country. Unfortunately, the directives of Washington in the IOC and WADA, they are guided by those directives, and they try to put obstacles to such competitions as the games of the future, the BRICS games in our countries. So how are they connected with the sports competitions, not under their auspices, not for their money? And the IOC calls on the National Olympic Committees not to allow the athletes to participate in the sports formats initiated by Russia. Have you heard such things anywhere? In business, competitive environment, anti-advertising is banned. Any advertiser in any country will say that anti-advertising, not indirect but direct, is a feature, a distinctive feature of defeat of a competitor. So what do we see here? We do not want to be someone's competitors here. We are just holding sports events. WADA states that RUSADA, the national regulator, is still not compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code. And those destructive actions by the US, sanctions, logistics disruptions, first due to the pandemics, COVID pandemics, then due to the restrictions imposed. So now it seems that all the necessary efforts for development should be taken. New sports interaction formats created for the lack of any national discrimination. But we just see politicized attempts to use this issue of sports, some efforts to denigrate, to put pressure to those athletes who are not favorable and who do not confirm these with these values alien to them. And everyone suffers here, primarily sports and athletes themselves. We are not in favor of this situation, and we will continue to protect the rights of our athletes, and the Olympic Charter should be protected, and the human rights norms accepted by everyone. We will be open for interaction on an equal and non-discriminatory basis in accordance with the spirit and principles of Olympism, we are in favor of fair and just competitions, ensuring all countries with equal access to full participation in the Olympic and Paralympic movements. We urge all sensible representatives to be guided by law and justice.
And what is the lost competence of the West? Let's look at the European situation in the European Union, which continues to deteriorate, according to the latest data from the European Union's Statistical Office Eurostat. The data on EU GDP dynamics in the third quarter of 2023 have been revised downward, even compared to December estimates, instead of zero quarterly growth, minus 0.1%, according to the results of the fourth quarter of last year, as predicted by forecasts. Most likely, if the figures are not retouched, negative GDP growth will once again be recorded. And in other words, we're talking about the EU. And we can talk about the onset of a formal recession in the EU. When will they finally admit in Brussels they get involved in any kind of business all over the world? Even state of affairs in countries that don't have a border with them. When will they take care of their economic agenda? Of course, it's interesting to talk about further shipments to Ukraine. But we're talking about the heart of the European continent, the heart of the western part of the continent. So what about the economics of the European Union? Let's fill that blank. The European economy has been stagnating since the fall of 2023 due to high energy prices, which isn't surprising, is it? Declining consumer demand amid unprecedented inflation and tightening of the European Central Bank's monetary policy. The official unemployment rate in the European Union in November 2023 amounted to 5.9%. At the same time, most countries have practically exhausted the possibilities to stimulate the economy by means of budget subsidies. In the third quarter of 2023, the total amount of government debt of the EU countries to the GDP of the association amounted to almost 83%. The highest figures are recorded in Greece, 165.5%, Italy about 141%, France 112%, Spain 110%, Belgium 108%, and Portugal 107.5%. The EU Industrial Production Index in 2023 has been consistently declining, which is also evidenced by Eurostat data. In November 2023, this indicator fell by 5.8% compared to the same period of the previous year. The biggest drop in industrial production was recorded in Ireland, minus 30%, Belgium, minus 11.6%, Bulgaria, almost minus 11%, Netherlands, minus 10%, and previously the leader Germany, which once played the role of the EU's economic locomotive, almost 5%. The US constantly, through their media, through their experts, or the discussion platforms, openly speak how the world, society, and the European Union have nothing to worry about. As for their energy and sustaining that energy, they have gas, they have oil, just not Russian. You can take it, you can buy it. But industrials in the European Union have to pay almost twice as much for electricity as in the US. As a consequence, there has been a steady decline in new orders and production. In November 2023, production of capital goods, buildings, machinery, and equipment fell by almost 9%. In essence, this demonstrates the reluctance of businesses to invest in new production capacity. The European Trade Union Confederation has been alarmed for a while by the declining investment attractiveness of large and energy-intensive industry, and as a consequence, the increasing number of cases of their relocation abroad with the subsequent outflow of qualified personnel. The European Association of Automobile Manufacturers in December 2023 recorded a 23% drop in new car sales in Germany. Why? Did something happen over there? Did something unpleasant take place? Why is no one reporting on that? Why do we constantly hear, once again, even at the economic forums, politics, supplies of arms, the perspective of not letting Russia win, that they constantly repeat as a mantra? Why do they not say a word about their economics and how they're going to overcome those problems? So I talked about the drop in new car sales by 23% in 2023 compared to the same period in 2022, which also dragged down the overall AES indicator to minus 3.3%. At the same time, sales in the electric vehicle segment fell by 47.6% in Germany and by 16.9% in the European Union as a whole. According to the European Commission, the Industrial Confidence Index, which is calculated on the basis of the total number of orders, current stocks of finished goods, and planned growth in production volumes, fell to minus 9 in December 2023. This reflects industrialists' attitudes towards Brussels' policies. I don't know how we can separate collective Brussels from Berlin if they are capable of leading their own course in Berlin, but I think that some part of economy at least. And decisions are made that lead to the destruction of German economy. But apparently, Brussels and Berlin and Paris are not satisfied with all this. They continue to persistently saw the tree on which they're sitting. The 12th package of anti-Russian sanctions adopted last December has already dealt a serious blow to the position of Belgian Antwerp as the diamond capital of the world, through which 80 to 90% of precious, rough, 50% of polished diamonds, and 40% of industrial diamonds passed. International banks are restructuring their lending policies, considering the diamond business in Antwerp as toxic. In such circumstances, many firms prefer to move their business to jurisdictions where manufacturing a favorable business climate prevails over political resonances. One question: what will the European Union do? How will they overcome this crisis? Because the basis for this holy elixir of well-being was the colonial dominance, with a chance to obtain free goods and free working forces. And then, of course, guaranteed at very comfortable prices gas and energy package from our country. They've lost both. Of course, there are still possibilities to influence and instigate a conflict somewhere and get more immigrants. And I'm speaking about the European Union countries right now. But there are still human rights norms. And no matter how the European Union treats immigrants, no matter how they discriminate against them, they have to supply this package. They have to feed them, to supply them with financial support, which is currently taking place with Ukrainian refugees that Zelensky is now addressing, saying that don't pay them, don't pay their packages. How exactly are they going to reincarnate the European Union economy? Where is the start point? Where is that magic bowl where they will see their economic future and see the flourishment? No one in the United States will speak about it. This secret is being kept for last. Meanwhile, the anti-Russian and in fact pro-American lobby in the European Union continues to generate basically suicidal measures for the European Union economy. Another example is the proposal by Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to ban the import of Russian foodstuffs into the European Union. I understand that Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia over the last decade have been demonstrating miracles of their own development. There's barely any statehood left. Only thanks to bureaucracy they're still keeping afloat. There is no science. There's barely any industry over there. And of course, the forefront of the European Union have a lot to teach to the old Europe, but not to the point where they're saying don't purchase food. It's not even about our interests, but what will it lead to in the Western Europe? In return, apparently they want to increase the consumption of American products. So they're lobbying for American genetically modified products so that they start supplying everything from that side. Liquefied gas, products. What will they do afterwards? How will they get out of that situation? Or perhaps they're betting on Ukrainian products, agricultural products grown and produced on land, and enterprises owned by essentially the same American corporations. Is that what they're betting on? That the Ukrainian agricultural products will save the European Union? I would like to remind you, it's part of the same Western logic to use poor uranium on the Ukrainian territory. It stays in the soil, and over the long period of time, it's not 1 or 2 years. They're throwing huge money in order to wash it out of the soil. It takes a lot of work and a lot of money. Or if they just don't mention that it's from the same fields where they use those shells, then you can easily sell them off in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, or Northern Europe. Those questions should be asked in the European Union to the population who should be interested in the future that's coming for them. Due to the absolutely ill-conceived policy of its leadership, not only with regards to Russia but also in other areas, the European Union is hopelessly losing its competitive positions and advantages, and is losing its chances to become a stable, strategically autonomous, as they say in Brussels, center of the multipolar world in the foreseeable future. The stability of the European Union has been so undermined by its own actions that the state of its economy now directly depends not only on the foreign economic and geopolitical situation. It sounds like a paradox. Such statements that the European Union apparently tries to play a leading role in the world economy and is seriously building its economic policy in the expectation that the vagaries of the weather will bypass it. The winter will not be cold, the summer will not be hot, the harvest will be scarce. Everyone sees it as grotesque, and if something goes wrong, the European officials will habitually try to hide their mistakes behind anti-Russian and Russophobic antics, as they're used to doing now. And right now, ordinary Europeans are asked to bear a little more and understand that the Kiev regime needs those means more. And those perspectives are also more needed for Ukraine than the European Union itself. And that the bright future is not that far ahead. Perhaps it's not a bright future, perhaps it's a green and digital one. They continue to sell off fairy tales, continue leading the populations astray, and their farmers are finally opening their eyes because over the year they have been fed the information on the agricultural safety in the world that is in danger, and they finally understood that the only threat to their security is their governments that are being led by Washington. There is no other threat. The main threat is their own governments, because they're killing the industrial complex. They're flooding the European Union countries with goods from the Ukrainian territory that is low in quality, and because the profit from it go not to the European Union countries, to the EU corporations or EU producers. They go over the ocean. Now for the current agricultural. Despite the sanctioned policy of our country, we're obligating our country's obligations in order to export agricultural goods, fertilizers, energy, and other critical products. We're well aware of the importance of supplies of such goods, primarily foodstuffs, for the socio-economic development of African countries, the achievement of indicators of prosperity, and the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. We're speaking on the UN agenda. At the same time, following the principal line of providing food aid to the most needy countries, the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, during the second Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg in July 2023, declared our country's readiness to supply wheat in the coming months as gratuitous food aid to a number of African countries. And I recall him saying that phrase. And the Russian president voiced this proposal and this decision of our country. And it was reflected by the applause in the audience, because people understand that against the backdrop of current situation, against a very real hybrid war that is being conducted against our country by the Western countries, it's an unprecedented decision. A decision that supplies food security that is being brought up by the West so much, but being realized by Russia. And in pursuance of this decision, 200,000 tons of grain were sent by ships to Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Central African Republic, and Eritrea. The first shipment was handed over to Somalia in November last year. In January this year, the humanitarian cargo was delivered to Burkina Faso, Mali, Somalia, Eritrea, as well as Cameroon, where the wheat will be processed into flour and sent to Central African Republic. At the moment, the grain unloaded in the port of Beira, Mozambique, is being transported to Zimbabwe. To summarize, we can say that Russia coped with its commitments in the shortest possible time, once again making a significant contribution to assuring food security on the African continent. But not a single Western media source will share that information, who over the years, from 2022 to 2023, have been speaking about food security. And endlessly. Those media have been speaking about Russia, blaming our country, making up false accusations that we're not only not committing to food security, but we're threatening it. But of course they will not mention these facts. But I hope that aside from those medias, there are other ways to pass along this information. A very important date, February 7th. 2024 marks the 100th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Russian Federation and the Italian Republic. I'd like to remind you that Russian-Italian relations have traditionally been characterized, I'd like to underline that fact, that it's past tense, by a centuries-old history, a uniquely rich joint cultural and spiritual heritage, successful experience of cooperation in various spheres, and a capital of mutual trust built up over decades. These relations were based on terms explained on the Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation between the Russian Federation and the Italian Republic of October 14, 1994, and the Action Plan and Relations between the Russian Federation and the Italian Republic of February 10, 1998. Until recently, Italy was one of the most important partners of the Russian Federation in Europe. Its policy towards our country has always been characterized by a traditionally balanced and non-confrontational approach. The leaders of our countries have maintained a rich political dialogue at the highest levels, and in difficult situations, Russia and Italy have always sought to lend a helping hand to each other, as was the case in 2020, when our country was one of the first to send large-scale aid to the Apennines to combat coronavirus infection, when Italy was literally suffocating from COVID, when Italy was mocked by their NATO partners, and Italian journalists and population were recording videos with appeals to understand their pain, the tragedy of their country. Once again, their partners were mocking them and we sent over our aid. This was fully in the fundamental interests of our peoples. It is all the more sad that after the start of the special military operation on February 24th, 2022, Italy, obediently following in line with the command and planticist approaches, and in fact on orders from Washington, has chosen a line of hard confrontation with Russia. Rome has unconditionally joined all anti-Russian sanctions restrictions of the European Union, the United States. They're providing systemic support to the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv, including direct supplies of heavy and lethal weapons, sending significant military, technical, and financial aid, and has fully solidarized with the insane idea of Russia's strategic defeat and its economic exhaustion. Although right now, they're rephrasing it that we cannot be allowed to win. You know, it's surprising, but they pride themselves on that fact, and not silently. Recently, there was an interview of the Minister of Defense of Italy who said that, judging by the scope of aid that they're providing for the Kiev regime, they're not in the top 5, but they're in the leading positions at the 2nd place, and they're proudly stating that fact. And even judging by the figures that are published to the NATO countries, even by those figures, they're not in the leading position, but this is how they want to show to Washington and who knows who else that even in killing European civilians, they have something to be proud of, that they're prepared for public appraisal of those horrors. Through the fault of the Italian side, virtually all areas of bilateral cooperation have been frozen. The work of well-established institutional mechanisms have been completely suspended. Nevertheless, we are confident that no one can destroy it without a trace the solid foundation of Russian-Italian relations, which are based on mutual interest and sympathy of the peoples for each other. Of course, we see, once again under the influence of the collective West, even for their own civic society, the Italian authorities dictate how they should build their relations with our citizens, with our compatriots, how they should develop cultural projects, humanitarian projects. They're dictating, they're twisting their hands, they're prohibited from holding exhibitions. I don't understand what article of Italian constitution this falls under, but they're doing it. We're firmly convinced that Italy's rejection of anti-Russian policy and the gradual restoration of pragmatic and mutually respectful cooperation are in our common interests. We have no doubt that the Italian people, with their inherent wisdom, foresight, and common sense, will sooner or later come to realize the counterproductive nature of the current destructive anti-Russian policy, which is aimed not at creation, but at destruction.
And some words. Our professional holiday is approaching the 10th of February, the Diplomatic Worker Day. And we will share the events held by our structures, our embassies, consulates, and representations at international organizations. So now let us move on to questions. Is Ria Novosti with us? Hello, Madam Zakharova. Yerevan has offered Baku to sign a non-aggression pact in case the conclusion of a peace treaty takes longer than expected. What is the attitude of Moscow to that proposal by the Armenian side? And can the signing of such a pact guarantee the absence of some intensified stage of conflict? So we think that it's the Azerbaijani side that should be addressed here. And in order to reach sustainable peace in the South Caucasus. We need to resume this set of trilateral agreements at the highest level. It's the roadmap that it also includes the elaboration of a peace treaty. Thank you. Is Izvestia with us? Yes, hello. My name is Ekaterina. I'm from Izvestia. My question is, what could be our proportionate response to the situation with Kamila Valieva from figure skating? We have discussed today the situation in global sports and the influence of the United States of America. So these are the efforts to neutralize one of the strongest representatives of global figure skating. And regarding the decision of the Court of Arbitration, it is not impartial, it is not objective, it has been like that from the start. The representatives of France, Great Britain and Australia, they have just ignored many provided crucial evidence provided by the Russian side in the course of this case. Our position has been in detail stated by the Russian Olympic Committee and by the Minister of Sports, Oleg Matitsyn. He called the decision of the Court of Arbitration in the case of Kamila Valieva a declaration of war on Russian sport. And the Russian side will defend the rights of our athletes before international structures, appealing such an unfair, I would say, wild decision. Is China Media Corporation with us? Yes, we have one question today. The figures published by the Department of State, so the aid to Ukraine growing by 56% and reaching $880 billion. Does it mean that despite the Ukrainian conflict going on for nearly 2 years, will the US continue its support to Ukraine in this war, exhausting war? So there has appeared a unique post in the Euro-Atlantic space. It's High Representative of the White House for the foreign policy of the European Union. It's Josep Borrell who is now in charge of this post. Due to his personal contribution, due to his charisma, his intellectual might, he has formed this new post. And he formulated the positions of those Euro-Atlantic Russophobic elites quite exactly, in my opinion. It will not be right if Russia and Ukraine will make peace. So that's just my answer to all the questions. It's just some basic, the basic motives, ideology, in essence, formulated by them. Whatever happens, whatever historical stage emerges, whatever the situation, whoever is right or wrong, whatever are the consequences, it will not be right if Ukraine and Russia make peace, as Mr. Borrell said. But you should understand, it's not the position of people, of countries. It's the position of the White House, of Downing Street, enshrined in NATO documents and provided as a certain kind of dogma by the European Union. It was supported by the satellites. It was not in 2022. In 2022, they just commanded the Kiev regime to intensify their shellings of civilians. And they got the adequate answer from the residents of the region, the regions they were shelling. They were forming that new quasi-states for a long period. It's just one more attempt to preserve the geopolitical dominance of the West. Their project to strengthen their possibilities, opportunities to easily construct states. It's just all was destroyed. It fell. The might of China is currently growing. We see many statements on that account. Jens Stoltenberg, during his visit, insisted that the Kiev regime should be supported because now it is Ukraine and tomorrow it could be Taiwan. Why are such parallels made? Why is now the population of China intimidated? What is the US doing between the two parts of one China? The third one is not needed there because we are speaking about a unified country there. The West does not demonstrate its readiness to politically settle the conflict in Ukraine and is ready to go on with the war until the last Ukrainian. And that concept of as a strategic defeat of our country, they understand that it is obsolete. They now understand the situation that Russia should not be allowed to win. So it's continuing arms shipments to the regime of Zelensky, what they call a good investment in the US, allowing Washington and its allies to lead a hybrid war against our country, risking the lives of their own soldiers. According to the US, it's a good deal. Everything is a good deal with them. One more good deal for them. There have been contracts with the American weapons industry for billions of dollars. The economy of peace, the economy of cooperation in the European continent has failed. You have seen the data on the European Union with reference to their own statistics. It's someone who has sick logics in the US, a good deal for them. How to attract good business, to destroy the economy created within the EU, the peaceful EU economy that also was built for interaction in Eurasian format. Energy cooperation and logistics, many details. But for common Ukrainians who are sent for death by those Kiev puppets, for them it's not a good deal, unfortunately. And we have repeatedly stated that our opponents, and now we call them unfriendly countries, they should conduct business. And I'm not talking about dialogue now, just business, taking into account security and interests of our country and other countries as well. Thank you very much. Is the Moscow Post with us? Yes, good afternoon. Today we have two questions. Russia and Belarus are planning to create a media holding of the allied state. What would be the tasks of this structure if we are talking about interests and possibilities of your ministry? We think that it is of importance because we think that this media holding should be a concrete and effective instrument for global task. The Russian Foreign Ministry supports the relevant ministries, the Ministry of Digital Development of Russia, the Ministry of Information of Belarus. On the 29th of January, during a meeting in St. Petersburg, the decree was adopted on the creation of the media company of the allied state, whose headquarters will be in Moscow and representations in Minsk. And the Council of Ministers of the allied state will participate, and the structure will include printed and media and resource media center. The relevant bilateral treaty is to be concluded no later than at the end of 2025. The media company created should create a new level in quality that will promote the coverage for Russian and Belarus citizens and strengthening our multi-century connections of two brotherly peoples. It will increase the authority in our country and on a global scale, and the Foreign Ministry of Russia will assist in implementing the signed documents and accompany diplomatically the negotiations of the competent authorities. The second question, your colleague Alexei Polishuk mentioned the readiness of to contribute to the dialogue between Tiraspol and Chisinau. Is the format 5+2, can it remain workable? And regarding the Transnistria as a part of Moldovan territory. Yes, with time the 5+2 format can renew its work, and the sides to the conflict express that opinion. And the Moldovan vice premier has said that this format has been frozen and not cancelled. So that's the position that is significant for us. And without the consideration of the Transnistria issue, there will be no perspective. Thank you. Is El Mayadin with us? Yes, as always, we are with you. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Our question is about lifting the Leningrad blockade and the stop of genocide. There has been a conference organized by different movements that call for increasing the Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip. It has been attended by 11 government ministers and 15 deputies of Israel's ruling coalition. What is the assessment of the Russian Foreign Ministry for those illegal actions? You mean this event, as I understand? As we know, some radical members of Israeli government, they just attended that conference, that symposium, but they also made statements about the deportation of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip and the return of Israeli settlers there evacuated. In 2005, as part of the so-called unilateral measures, and we have made a number of statements on the deportation of Palestinians. We consider such statements unacceptable. They are contrary to Middle East settlement that envisages the establishment of an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, and is against the rights of the indigenous Palestinian population of Gaza Strip, and is provoking the anti-Israeli sentiments among the Arabs. It's extremely provocative rhetoric, actually. Thank you. Is news.ru with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Mikhail Rosen from news.ru. We have 3 questions. The Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said that his country would like to conclude a peace treaty with Russia. However, it will continue the policy of sanctions against Russia. How do you assess the perspectives of signing a peace treaty with Tokyo? It was in the statement by the foreign ministry was published on response measures with regard to actions by the government of Japan. The state that is of clearly unfriendly stance. This statement is available on the website. I would like to highlight the 21st of March 2022. After the start of a special military operation in February 2022, the government of Japan conducts extremely unfriendly actions against Russia. Those packages of illegal sanctions, Russophobic attitudes in the Japanese society, and together with the US and other NATO member states in the Far Eastern borders, they also provide military weapons aid to the Kiev regime. And we see no basis for the dialogue with Tokyo in order to create some grounds for long-term relations. And Russia will continue to toughly react with countermeasures, adequately using all the available instruments guided exclusively by our national interests.
Thank you, and we have one more question. The special representative of the UN in the Caucasus region said that Alliance is impressed by their foreign policy and they want more rapprochement. How can you comment on this statement? I believe that if someone wants closeness or rapprochement, we have to understand how safe it is, what consequences it will lead to. We've seen before what the NATO closeness leads to for other countries, to their involvement in conflicts, to the loss of their sovereignty and independence, to their will being forced in planning and in all other spheres, and more importantly, to the lack of even so much as opportunity to pursue their own national interests. Perhaps we should go from the basis. What are the national interests of each country, and in particular the country that you speak about, Armenia? Perhaps this should be analyzed. They should open the map. What kind of region, between what neighbors this country is located. They should read history books. So for those who are speaking not for the closeness of whoever it is, those are sovereign countries, they can decide for themselves. But as for this closeness, that means breaking off ties with the countries of the region or their neighbors, or at least some strain in those relations. This should be analyzed in order to understand what are the national countries of Armenia itself. What is beneficial? What brings short-term, mid-term, or long-term benefit to them? And base their decisions on that, not on promises, because the West makes a lot of promises to everyone. So what exactly have they really done? But when they have to pay off officials, as we've seen in Ukraine or Moldova, and in a number of other countries, they have enough money for that. But as for creating real material platforms and basis for development of the economy of the countries whose closeness NATO and the US are counting on, somehow none of those promises are ever delivered. And over the last 30, 40 years, at least, I have not seen a single example. Thank you. And one more question. How do you react to the decision on using the profits of the frozen assets of Russia? I think these words should be replaced by more realistic ones. Those are not frozen but stolen ones. They're not being held. Let's be closer to the reality. Of course, I understand that it will be painful, but we have to do it someday. Our position on the possible seizure of Russian assets, illegally blocked, basically stolen in a number of Western jurisdictions, remains unchanged. We regard such actions not only as trivial theft, but also as an escalation of the West's economic aggression against the Russian Federation as a trade war. Any attempts to confiscate funds belonging to a country, the legality of which no one questions or can question, would be a gross violation of international law. That is the internal legislation of those countries, and of the bilateral documents, obligations, and so on. As for between states, it is noteworthy that even the European Union agreed with this earlier. However, the current EU elites are unable to resist the pressure from Washington, which demands that the EU take concrete measures to seize Russian assets. Moreover, no one in the European Union is any more willing to invest its own funds in the hopeless Ukrainian project. And we're witnessing a social explosion. Let alone are they willing to pay for the Americans, who need it right now as much as they need air to breathe. They understand that Ukraine has to be kept afloat. Americans are not able to fund it. So who are they trying to use for that? The European Union, but the European Union budget is already cracking at the seams, as we've already said, and the level of public debt in the EU member states is off the scale. I've already spoken on the figures today. Patching the hole in the pocket at the expense of Russian assets is a very tempting idea for the European Union. It is almost an obsession. The only thing that's keeping them from taking the last step are the consequences. They see that we're responding, and to say the least, they're devastated, and they understand that the response will be very firm. Brussels has decided to cover itself by saying that it will not seize the assets themselves, but the income they bring in. But once again, speaking simply, no matter what fraudulent schemes the EU invents, it does not change the essence of the matter. We're talking about an attempt to legitimize theft. And it is no coincidence that the European Central Bank has previously directly pointed out that any such actions could lead to long-term negative consequences for the European Union economy and the international role of the euro. But the EU population and what will happen to the currency, and Washington does not care what will happen to that currency. They're only betting on their own currency, and everything else they see as competition, and we're well aware of what they're doing with competition. The actions of the EU clearly demonstrate that any country that seeks to pursue a sovereign policy runs the risk of becoming a victim of economic banditry on the part of the West. Today, the reason may be a so-called wrong foreign policy. Tomorrow, the results of elections that displease them, and the day after tomorrow, excessive industrial emissions into the atmosphere from the point of view of Brussels. Literally anything could be a reason. Human rights, ecology, wrong point of view on the cancel culture. Against this background, it is not surprising that many states of the global south are gradually reducing the share of the dollar, euro, and other Western currencies in the financial servicing of foreign economic contracts, as well as creating an alternative payment and settlement infrastructure instead of SWIFT. They're all trying to secure themselves. The scope is insane. And it speaks for itself. This is how the financial economic basis for a multipolar world is being formed, in which there will be no place for dictate and sanctions by the Western minority against countries they don't like. Thank you, Madam Zakharova. Thank you. Is Radio Saga with us? Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes. Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. How does the Russian Foreign Ministry react to publications by Western media that Russia is using weapons from Iran and DPRK in the course of a special military operation? If this is true, does it violate any legislative acts? You know, these questions, we're hearing them not for the very first time. They have been answered by Sergei Lavrov, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. He answered them in New York during the interviews for Western media. We regularly comment in our departments during the briefings on social media. Once again, you can formulate this question no matter how many times. Try to approach it, the subject. But the global answer remains the same. The Russian Federation does not break by affiliating with Iran and DPRK. We're developing our relations on bilateral basis, based on mutual respect, mutually beneficially, and not of the international obligations are violated by that. That's it, period. As for how we do it, why we do it, this is our personal business when it comes to other countries. Thank you. Can I ask one more question? Yes, of course. The faith of Mr. Lopez, who was murdered in jail, Gonzalo Lira, is that being taken care of? He said that he was being tortured for 8 months. Is Russia taking care of that on the international level? As for the Chile journalist, yes, I would like to underline this is a US and Chile citizen. He had no Russian citizenship. He's not our compatriot. He's not a representative of Russian or Russian-speaking media. Which is why we have no jurisdiction to take care of this issue as we would have if this was our citizen or compatriot or an employee of Russian media. But since the issues of international journalists and their security fall on the international scope, we understand how important it is. We're talking about Ukraine, how Kiev regime is not fulfilling their obligations, violating rules. There are stories about threats to life. And how many journalists have been blown up, murdered, threatened, or kidnapped. Anything you can name it happened. So as a country whose journalists are suffering from terrorist acts and extremist acts from the Kiev regime, we will attract attention to this horrible event, and we will speak about it to the international community. Thank you, Madam Zakharova. Thank you. Is Anna Dalu with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. Hello. We have two questions. The UN International Court will rule on the lawsuit filed by Ukraine against the Russian Federation on the application of the Genocide Convention and will announce a decision on whether the case falls within its jurisdiction. What decision do you expect from the consideration of the case in The Hague? Yes, indeed, on February the 2nd this year, the court's decision on the jurisdictional objections of the Russian Federation in the case of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide of 1948 is expected. Our delegation will be present at the announcement. We expect the court to demonstrate impartiality and independence as the principal judicial organ of the UN system. Our substantive comments will be provided once the content of the judgment is known. And we would also like to note that this decision is interlocutory and will only address whether or not the court has jurisdiction to hear the case. Our second question. After the recent unmanned flying object, the president of the US, Joe Biden, said that Washington should react. Does the Minister for Foreign Affairs think that it could instigate the involvement of the United States in the Middle East? I think he said the phrase, but he didn't finish it. Washington should answer before the people for their crimes. And for some reason, they're not answering before the law for the atrocities and illegal acts they have committed against so many countries and peoples. So it's a beautiful phrase. Only we should consider it in a different context. It's high time Washington answered for their crimes. And they're only capable of answering with force. They're only capable of using that force, which leads not to the resolving of the situation, but only of deterioration. Thank you. And our last question. Mali and Burkina Faso have sent the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, a notice of withdrawal from the association. Could you please comment on this decision? On January 28th this year, the joint communique of the heads of said countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, after withdrawal from the Economic Community of West African States. The three leaders attributed their decision to the fact that ECOWAS, which is a direct code, is under the influence of foreign powers, has betrayed fundamental principles, has become a threat to member states and their peoples, whose happiness it is meant to ensure. End of quote. In addition, the community, they argued, had failed to assist these countries in fighting terrorism and strengthening security, as well as imposed illegal and illegitimate sanctions in violation of its own rules, which had worsened the situation of the population. In the meantime, the ECOWAS Commission, on 28th of January, issued its own communique, noting that no official notification to withdraw from the community had been received from the aforementioned countries. So the Commission considers that those states remain important members of ECOWAS, whose leadership remains committed to finding a way out of this situation. So there are very contradicting statements. We're continued to follow closely the developments surrounding the membership of these countries in ECOWAS. We trust that the problems that have arisen in relations between the members of the important Integration Association for the Sahara-Sahel region and West Africa as a whole can be resolved through equitable and mutually respectful dialogue. Thank you very much. Is Kurdistan 24 with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. Kurdistan 24. Recently, Alexander Lavrentiev said that the American troops will leave Syria. It is known that Kurds have played an important role in the combat against terrorism. How will Russia promote the rights of Kurds in Syria? First of all, as far as we know, there was a recent denial that the US was withdrawing troops from Syria. Secondly, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we're making consistent efforts toward a comprehensive settlement in Syria on the basis of strict adherence to the principles of respect for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of that country. We're ready to assist the legitimate government of friendly states. And Syria is one of those countries. So we will continue to do everything that is in our power for Syria to be truly free of foreign presence. We'll contribute to establishing security and return of peace to the whole territory of Syria. Thank you. Thank you. Is Sputnik with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova. As for Moldova, the new Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Babshoy, said that he's curious whether the earlier ban on entry to Russia against him will now be lifted. Could you please repeat? The new Moldovan Foreign Minister, Mihai Babshoy, has said that he wonders whether the earlier ban on entry to Russia against him will now be lifted. He was included in the list in the summer as the deputy of the Moldovan parliament, but right now he's probably harboring hopes that that ban will be lifted. So, Madam Zakharova, what do you expect from the new Moldovan foreign minister? And how do you assess, in perspective, the opportunities for the development of bilateral relations?
You know, the first part, yes, it was actually funny, very funny, because I remember how Mikhail Popshoy, I think it was back in the summer of last year when he was the Vice Speaker of the Parliament, he stated, he wrote that on social media, he wrote that he was honored to be in line with many good people who can no longer visit Russia. End of quote. So now, is it interesting for him whether it will be returned? And seriously, there are many problems in our relations. There are many of them. Of course, you can not notice them and just continue that wordplay as Mikhail Popshoy did a year ago. He stopped consultations between foreign ministries. The contacts are scarce. And the entry of our employees in embassies has been restricted to Chisinau. In July 2023, the Moldovan side reduced by 2/3 the number of personnel of our foreign missions. How do you think, does it refer to ways or methodology of the search for dialogue? I very much doubt that. There are so many problems, and in such spheres, they touch upon not only some narrow groups or elitist communities. These are problems faced by our people every day in our countries and primarily in Moldova. We are ready to resolve the bilateral issues and hope that at some stage, I do not know, during this Sado regime or in the future, this knowledge about the necessity not to create problems but to resolve them It will prevail in Chisinau because, I repeat, actually there are many problems already created, and I have qualified and noted that many of them have been created on the initiative of the current authorities, literally. But if there is a desire to resolve them, we should start that. But it's not a question for us. We have done nothing to complicate the bilateral relations. Thank you, Madam Zakharova. Thank you. Is the Great Asia TV channel with us? Yes. Hello, Madam Zakharova. In your opinion, how should the internal information agenda be restructured today, taking into account the policy of turning to the East? We know a lot about the problems of Biden, the success of Trump, and the sorrows of Macron, but there is not much information in our media space about the key issues of the relevant global agenda. Do you think something should be changed in this area in our country? Well, first you ask how it should be done, and then you ask whether it should be done. Please be more precise in your wordings. I do not agree that we now observe some turn to the east. We have stated many directions of our foreign policy. We have enshrined that in our foreign policy concept as the cause of the country, and we have done that much time ago. On the basis of our history, of our geography, the tasks pursued by our country, we take advantage of the opportunities that provide real pluses and the results. Western Europe and other parts of the planet that have solidarified with the Russophobic policies by Washington, they have isolated themselves from us themselves. And this closed door, or maybe even the wall, it should not be broken by us now. As Mr. Lavrov has said, let them act now. We will make use of other possibilities we have now. We will not just duck or turn somewhere where 1/6 of the ground is civilization with such a volume of resources and such plans for the future that in general we should not, and it's not our plans to make some rapid turns. It's not us endlessly changing our courses, making U-turns, some other numbers. We do not contradict ourselves in our policy. We have exact policy. We are implementing that. It's obvious. It has been stated. If there are changes in the world, we take them into account, but we pursue the cause enshrined in our doctrine. Regarding the media coverage, the realities should influence and are influencing the media work. It's connected opening the correspondent points in the countries where we have not been present, and the closure of correspondent points where the work is becoming unsafe. It's also the creation of hubs, country hubs of our media corporations, our media, where we have not had information presence. It's agreements with between media outlets in our country with other countries, the cooperation, and it's about the states where this cooperation has not developed or has not been underway. It's programs that are implemented together, developed together, some joint purchases. It's not just single examples, but systematic work. As you have formulated one part of your question, I would not accept that, but whether it should be further developed, yes, I agree, it should be further developed. And the viewers should agree that we have the biggest, the longest border with Kazakhstan. It's our neighbor. It's the people we have been part of one unified country. The second large border is with China. It's our neighbor. We have had many common things historically, different things, good things. We have a high level of relations in all the spheres. It's being increased, and people, our public, they should understand that it's of major importance, not just live with the ideas of those regions that have separated themselves from us by drawing some division lines. Thank you very much. If you have no more questions, goodbye to you. All the best, prosperity to you. Thank you, goodbye. Thank you.